As the deadline approaches, less than 2 weeks away, it surely seems like the Orioles and the Phillies once again are matching up as perfect trade partners. But what could that deal look like? Let's find out.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Locked On Orioles, Locked On Phillies crossover episode here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Connor Newcomb from Locked On Orioles. That is Connor Thomas of Locked On Phillies. This is a Connor crossover as well. And Connor, it's good to be talking trade deadline. I don't think I assumed that these two teams would be matching up in a trade as buyers and sellers. I thought maybe it'd be closer to what happened last year, which is they kind of did a buyer swap. But I'm assuming things are going a little bit better in Philly when it comes to the baseball team than Baltimore right now.
Yeah, you'd have a hard time convincing the fan base that's going better in Philadelphia because you know how Philly fans are. But it is wild how the Orioles have led into the sellers market, and it opens up a lot of really interesting possibilities from these teams, maybe sending some players back and forth that were sent back and forth the last time that we got into a couple of deals, maybe a more aggressive move from the Philadelphia Phillies, who really, like, the short and long of it is they need bullpen help, they need outfield help, and that's why these two teams match up so well.
The Orioles have relievers. They have outfielders. They have guys who are rentals. They have guys who have a couple more years, but they might be willing. And that's where I wanted to set the scene. You said it perfectly what the Phillies need, right? They're a team that has come very close a couple of times to winning a World Series or at least being there at the end. They're trying to maximize every season they have of this core, which is not a young core, but it's a super talented core and a team that I think if the universe is right, they should win a World Series before this thing breaks up, and they got to go for it every year. On the Orioles side, this has been a valley in what's been a really good past couple of years. They're 9 games under. Fans still want to hold out hope because it's only like 7 games out of the wild card, but there are 6 teams between the Orioles and I believe the Mariners right now who are in the final wild card spot. And the Orioles are playing much better baseball. They've been a good team since the beginning of June. They dug too big of a hole, and they have a lot of really talented rentals, which I think the Orioles' plan is right now, hey, we're still going to try to be a winning team in 2026, but this season's kind of toast. And we have a lot of guys who are going to be free agents. We don't plan on bringing a lot of them back after this year. You might as well get something for them. So let's start in the bullpen because I think this is the most interesting part of the conversation because of who the Orioles have to trade away this year. Our two teams last year made a couple of intriguing deals. The Orioles got Seranthony Dominguez for Austin Hayes. It became pretty clear that the Orioles won that trade. Then it was the Gregory Soto for Seth Johnson and Moises Chase. That one's been kind of up in the air to this point. Chase's been injured. Johnson hasn't, I don't think, pitched a lot for the Phillies this year. He's been mostly in AAA. And Soto's had his good, had his bad, which you know of. So those are the top 2 Orioles relief trade candidates. They're both impending free agents. They're both 30. They both, Dominguez is having a better year than Soto, but they're both still have the good stuff. I don't think the Orioles are planning on bringing them back. I think the first question we have to ask, I don't know what Philly fans' thoughts are, but at least from the Dombrowski standpoint, like, do you think the Phillies would even be willing to just turn things around a year later and make a deal to get one of these two back on their team?
That's such the tough thing about it, because if Seranthony Dominguez and Greg Soto were named something else and different players with the same exact situation, maybe it's more realistic. But so much of this feels like perception for Dombrowski because he's got a Hall of Fame resume. One day he's going to be in Cooperstown for what he's done in front offices around baseball, but not quite what he's done in Philadelphia. And this fan base is going to look at, well, you let Jeff Hoffman walk, you let Carlos Estevez walk in this offseason. You replace them with Jordan Romano, who has not been up to snuff. He's got a 7+ ERA right now. And if your answer to fixing the bullpen is what's going to feel like retreads, there's going to be part of the fan base that is upset with that. There's also the issue with Greg Soto and Seranthony Dominguez of the mentality of coming back to a place like Philadelphia. I think the best thing for Seranthony Dominguez was getting out of the city. It felt like one of those instances that you see in sports where the player's kind of in a rut with the team. The talent is there, but for whatever reason, it doesn't really work. And Gregory Soto, never really worked in this town. He had a 4+ ERA both years with the Phillies. So I don't know that they'd be clamoring, the fan base that is, to see those guys come back, even if they are in situations where they could help this team. I think the name that is really focused on for the bullpen is Felix Bautista, which doesn't really seem like a name that's going to be available from the Orioles' perspective.
Yeah, I think didn't Gregory Soto even kind of outwardly call out the Phillies after the trade last year about how he thought he should have been the closer, which is funny because I think everyone laughed at that. And then he was the de facto closer by the end of last season for the Orioles. So he was pitching so well, he kind of got what he wanted. Right. You know, it's so intriguing between those two. From my perspective, looking into a fan base that is much more rabid than an Orioles fan base because it is just Philly, I would think that the hope is that they could separate the two. Like Soto is just Soto. He's maybe a slightly better version than he was at the end of Philly, but he's the pitcher he is. Dominguez has added this new splitter, which has allowed him to get lefties out, and he's become like locked down the Orioles' best reliever. 2 runs allowed in his last 19 outings. The strikeout rate's up. He's still walking guys, but he's been great. So maybe Phillies fans could think, oh, you know, he's a different kind of pitcher now. We can get over that hump. But I understand not wanting that. And that's the other issue here is that while Ken Rosenthal reported in The Athletic on Thursday that the Orioles are listening to offers on Felix Bautista, I don't think they really want to trade him. And that is for 2 reasons. One is, although he's come back from the Tommy John surgery, he missed all of 2024 with Tommy John. He's come back and he's been good, right? At a 2.41 ERA. He's got a high strikeout rate. Like he's been a very helpful and good and one of the better closers in baseball. On the flip side, you're still kind of selling low on Bautista. Like he's still only a half season back from Tommy John. He's still not back to the level where you could have argued he was the best closer in baseball at one point in 2023 before the elbow injury. He hasn't reached that level again. And for the Orioles, you look at him who, he has 2 more seasons of control after this year. And if you're the O's and you're trying to win in those 2 seasons, it's really hard to replace the production of Felix Bautista. So you have to be absolutely if the O's were in full teardown mode, this would be a much better matchup for Bautista, but they want Bautista to be saving games, down the stretch in a postseason run in 2026. Now, the fact that they're listening, Elias listened to everyone, but I think if they were blown away, it's something that could happen. But I worry for the Philly side of getting Bautista that Mike Elias would have to see something like the name Andrew Painter for him to make a Bautista move. And I don't think the Phillies are doing that. Yeah,
and Painter's already been pretty much said off the table for Dave Dombrowski and his side. So that's what makes this tough. And we'll talk about the Cedric Mullins, Ramon Laureano portion of it later on. But the Phillies seem like their strategy is going to be one big swing. And then they may make some other ancillary moves. And if that one big swing is back into the bullpen, Seranthony Dominguez doesn't fit that bill. Greg Soto doesn't fit that bill. They could be additional moves individually, but it would be an all-out for Bautista. It would be an all-out for a guy like Yohan Duran, Emmanuel Clase, when we start to look at the American League Central. And if that's going to be the big swing, that's the goal for that move. And that would mean that like outfielders like Mullins or Laureano could fit a little bit more. And that's the prime example, right? Because if the Phillies were to take a big swing, it seems much more likely they do so with a big-time back-end reliever because there's more of them available than a big-time outfielder, which is why guys like Mullins and Laureano are in play. And we'll talk more about them. But I could see much more likely Seranthony Dominguez of the two, him and Soto, coming back to Philly because he had success at points in the postseason in this city. And there's so much to be said for a guy that knows how to pitch on this Phillies team and knows how to pitch in this city. Like it's a lot of pressure playing here, and some guys have crumbled in that. And I think we're seeing that with Jordan Romano right now. So maybe there is some intrigue in bringing back a player that at least can fit the mentality of the city and is comfortable in this type of environment.
And really the one other name, I mean, there's a chance the Orioles would move someone like Yennier Cano, but he's another guy who was an all-star 2 years ago, and he was sent down to AAA a couple weeks ago. He's back now, but he'd also be kind of selling low. The other name is Andrew Kittredge. He had a knee surgery in spring training. It wasn't like a serious tear. It was a little cleanup. It took him out for 2 months. He's come back and he's been very much fine, I would say. Like he has not been the Andrew Kittredge that we saw in St. Louis and Tampa Bay the past couple of years, where he was kind of quietly like one of the better setup man in baseball. He's 35. He's got a 4 ERA. His strikeouts are fine. His walks are low, which is nice. he has a team option for next year, so you could potentially get a year and a half of Kittredge. Is that of any use where he probably wouldn't cost too much, and it wouldn't come with the baggage of a Dominguez or a Soto where, if you threw Kittredge in the 6th in a playoff game, that's a good guy to have in that spot. You're probably not bringing him in to pitch the 8th or 9th at this point, but that could be like a cheap secondary option. I don't know if those guys, maybe a Philly, they try to swing for a Duran and they also bring in a veteran middle relief type to go together.
Yeah, that's absolutely in play. So I think the order of it chronologically would be a bigger move for a Clase or a Duran, and then you're trying to fill out those spots. But what the Phillies have right now in the bullpen is a Jordan Romano with a 7+ ERA, who has not really handled the high leverage innings consistently. Orion Kerkering, who at 24 is still trying to find himself at the major league level. And then you also have Matt Strom, who was an all-star last year, but has pitched to mid-3s ERA this year and looks like he's regressed, has never really had plus strikeout stuff. And with Jose Alvarado getting suspended, those are the only 3 guys in this bullpen that are even remotely comfortable for Phillies fans to see in like this hypothetical playoff bullpen situation. And all 3 of those guys come with their downside. So the Phillies need to fill this out with just legit dudes that can throw at the major league level. Seth Johnson, who you brought up earlier, he's in the major league bullpen right now, and he hasn't thrown a lot, but that just kind of shows you where this bullpen is at, is they've been flipping guys from minors up to majors constantly all season long. So even those relievers where like, could this guy work, kind of a low 4, high 3 ERA, those are all in play if the Phillies do make a big swing to fill out the rest of this.
So we'll see if maybe Philly's interested in someone like Kittredge, but I think the other match here is outfielders, and that's what we're going to get to next. The Orioles have a couple of guys they could be interested in moving, and they could certainly help out the Phillies in this run, and we'll break down what maybe a deal like that could look like coming up next. But first, this crossover episode, Locked On Phillies and Locked On Orioles, is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. And the best part about FanDuel is it's easy to use. There's a fast payout, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Just open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's Connor Newcomb and Connor Thomas of Locked On Orioles and Locked On Phillies. Little crossover episode here. So, Connor, we talked about the bullpen. The Phillies have needs, but I think there's just an interesting amount of baggage here that might make these two teams not want to do a deal, because Dominguez and Soto at last year's deadline came directly from the Phillies. As you said, I think there'd be more welcoming of Dominguez. Soto kind of shut that door on his way out, I think. So maybe that one does not happen. But Dominguez had some, remember when he first came up, he was the closer, right? In Philly, he was like 22. The team still wasn't back to being good yet. And then he was closing out games in the 9th inning. Let's move to the outfield, though. What is the situation? What level of panic are we at in the Rojas, Marsh, Castellanos situation out there at the moment?
Yeah, we're at the major league level at DEFCON 2, I'd say. We're not quite at the absolute worst, but we're getting up there. And this idea that Justin Crawford, who right now is a AAA tear the cover off the ball, their top outfield prospect, he's number 3 in their system overall. The wait for him to come up has been going on pretty much since April, and it doesn't seem like the Phillies are in any rush to move him to the major league level for a contending team. So they're only 21 years old. So if you look at what the Phillies are stuck with right now, they have Brandon Marsh, who has been swinging it a little bit lately, but went through a stretch to start the season where he looked like he couldn't hit at the AA or single A level. Yohan Rojas, who is an underachieving offensive player, better as a defensive replacement. Nick Castellanos having a nice solid year out there. He's never going to win a Gold Glove, but he creates enough offense in the middle of the lineup to make up for that. And Max Kepler has been one of the more disappointing offseason acquisitions in all of baseball. He's hitting like 210. He has shown a little bit of power, but man, has he been miserable at the plate. And he doesn't face lefties. So his replacement in a platoon is Otto Kemp, who's like the Phillies' 24th overall prospect, who has not played left field at any level besides a little bit of AAA this year. It's a mess. So any help at any position, preferably right-handed bats, are what the Phillies are going to be after in the outfield. The problem is there just aren't premier right-handed outfield bats that are going to be on the market this year. So that means guys like Cedric Mullins, who's a lefty, or Ramon Laureano are certainly in play.
Let me make the case for Ramon Laureano being close to a premier right-handed bat this year, because the Orioles went and got him for $5 million per year. And here's the other nice part about Laureano. $6.5 million team option for 2026. If he is producing anything close to what he's done this year, he is worth a lot more than $6.5 million, where you can just check a box and get him back for that price next year. Now, that's why some Orioles fans don't want to trade him, because Ramon Laureano, 284, 350, 517 slash for a 140 WRC plus with 11 home runs this year, where he's cut his strikeouts, he's upped his walks. He's basically become an offensive player that we've never seen. If he does this for the rest of the season, this will be his best ever offensive year. And I think people know Laureano more for the insane throws he's made from the outfield, the incredible arm that he has. But even back in the day with Oakland, like, he had some good offensive seasons in his early 20s. He has not done something to this level at the plate, and it looks fairly sustainable. Like, there is some high BABIP that he's running with, and I think he'll come a little bit down to earth, but he can play all three outfield positions, and he's hitting the ball hard, and he's hitting the ball in the air, and he's doing damage. He's barreling the baseball. His hard hit rate is by far the highest of his career. Like, there are legitimate things here with Laureano where I think he's taken some sort of step forward. And it sounds like the Phillies need somebody who could maybe hit right-handed or hit it all. I mean, at the very least, you could throw him in there as, I guess, a platoon with Marsh. But the interesting thing for Laureano has been the Orioles signed him to be a platoon bat. They signed him to come in, play, 3 times a week, hit lefties. That's what he's done. He's hit righties to an enormous number, whereas he's been just kind of okay against left-handers, and he's turned into an everyday player for this injured Orioles team. He's hitting 307 with a 166 WRC plus against righties, basically been league average against lefties. So he's a guy who, if he keeps this up, you could play him every day. I mean, that could be a guy I feel like that could fit in that Philly outfield nicely, because he could play all 3 positions. And if he's producing like this, you bring him back for cheap next year. And even if he sinks more into a part-time player next year, it's probably still a valuable piece for that team.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Phillies have had an issue in the corners for years. They've had an issue in center for years. So anywhere somebody can slot in is fine. He'd probably fit better as a platoon with Kepler in left, because it's much more likely that the Phillies do something with Brandon Marsh at the deadline than I think it is with Max Kepler. Max Kepler was on a $10 million deal, which is, of course, cut down prorated via how much he's played this year. But still, it would be a tough contract to move off for a guy batting 210. And he's also a guy that still has pop. So he'd be the guy that you want to keep. And then maybe him and Laureano, they platoon out in left field. And then you call up Crawford. Let me run you through what the ideal Phillies scenario is. And this is why Laureano fits for me. The Phillies move Brandon Marsh at the trade deadline. Max Kepler gets a platoon mate, a right-handed hitter like Laureano in left field. Justin Crawford gets called up to play center field. Another lefty bat, so that could be a guy that Laureano works in with as well. And then you get 2 relievers, one high level and one mid-level, like a Kittredge that we were talking about earlier. So there are multiple players we've already talked about that kind of fill that bill, and that makes Laureano really interesting. It also, to me, makes Mullins less interesting, because I feel like my description of Max Kepler with he showed pop, but the average is low, left-handed bat in the outfield, kind of matches a lot of what Mullins has been this year.
Yeah, Mullins just a more center fielder type Max Kepler, basically, is what he's been. Like, if you're worried about defense and center, Mullins will give you that more than Kepler. But I'm so intrigued that you say that too, because I've been talking about on Locked On Orioles how I have no idea what Mullins' trade value is, right? He's a good center fielder by the eye test, but his defensive metrics are not that. They're not Gold Glove level. He was maybe one of the best hitters in baseball in April. He hasn't been very good since then. He usually doesn't hit lefties. This year he's hitting lefties much better than righties, which is kind of weird to put him in a platoon spot the way he's been going. He's an impending free agent, so that obviously lowers his value a little bit. There's not a lot of rental center fielders that ever get traded at the deadline, like true starting center fielders, so I just don't know. So it seems like And again, if these guys just weren't named Seranthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto, we'd have an even better trade package that we're putting together. But it seems like Laureano might be the fit in Philly. So we're going to take one more break. When we come back, let's play GM. Let's do Elias and Dombrowski right here. And let's try to put together a deal that helps the Phillies this year, helps the Orioles next year, and makes everybody happy at this year's deadline. Connor Newcomb from Locked On Orioles and Connor Thomas from Locked On Phillies with a little deadline preview crossover. We're, as you're listening to this or watching this, about 13 days away from the trade deadline. Phillies are going for it. Orioles, they're falling into the seller category at this point, but they have outfielders, they have relievers that the Phillies are certainly going to want. So, Connor, here is my next question. If the Phillies could get a deal done where they say it's a Laureano and an Andrew Kittredge in one deal from Baltimore, I mean, does that fill two holes on the team? And do you think Philly would be willing to, pay up a little bit prospect wise to get two players in one deal? And the nice thing about the two of them is they both have team options for next year. So if they perform well, neither of them have to be rentals and they can both be 2026 Phillies as well.
Yeah, that does fit again with one other larger move in the bullpen. That would be a secondary move with the package deal that I think makes a lot of sense for the Phillies. The weird thing, I'd love to get your perspective on this before we're done with the episode. Like what a seller is and what a buyer is at the Major League Baseball trade deadline in the year 2025 has totally changed with how many teams are close and how many teams are on these fringe spots where with the extra wild card spot feel like they're in. There are so few sellers. So the past couple of years, you haven't really seen top prospects or top players moved at the deadline. So I don't really, it's very hard to nail down exactly what the value of players are. I don't just think it's a Cedric Mullins thing. I don't just think it's a this instance thing. So as far as building a deal is concerned, I don't know where you'd be looking at as far as prospects are concerned. I'm looking at a guy like Gabriel Rincones Jr., who was in camp with the Phillies in spring training this year, a guy that really showed some offensive prowess, was close to getting a shot with the team and just didn't break camp with the team. He's had a bit of a down year, but he's another guy that projects quickly to the majors in the outfield. As far as pitchers, the name that a lot of teams are going to ask about is Mick Abel, but being that he's the number 5 prospect in the system, I see him a lot more as a piece of a deal for a guy like Yohan Duran or Emmanuel Clase than for this ancillary deal. So the top arm you could be looking at that's close. Here's the question. Now we're going back and forth, and this is the issue with the Orioles and Phillies. You want Seth Johnson back? He's at the major league level right now, and he's looked okay through like 4 games worth of work.
So here's what's interesting, right? It's the flip side of the Soto Dominguez, where it's like, if you're Mike Elias, are you going to take that guy back? Do you have more room for him now? Yes, you kind of do, because you're in a different spot in your bullpen. Another name that might be surprising for me to bring up, given that he's been in the bigs this year and it hasn't really gone super well, is Michael Mercado. I feel like is someone where he would have maybe a bigger runway down the stretch and a little less pressure if he were in the Orioles bullpen, and could potentially have a chance to develop into something in Baltimore. And it also kind of fits the mold of the Orioles, where they're looking for guys who are either already in the big leagues or knocking on the door, because at the very least they want the timeline to be 2026. This is at least a big league player for us. Doesn't have to be a big league regular giant part, but at least a major leaguer by 2026. And that's someone I've looked at because he's gotten a little bit of a taste this year. He is a little bit older, right? He's 26 years old, I think, at this point. And I don't, is he healthy and in the bullpen right now? Is he back in AAA? Like what even is his status at the moment?
Yeah, he's healthy. He's down in AAA. He's come up a couple of times and he just looks lost. Sometimes when you get a young relief pitcher up there, you can just kind of tell. They get the deer in the headlights look of like, okay, the stuff looks like it's kind of playing. The mentality doesn't look like it's quite there yet. Last year, he actually looked more comfortable at the major league level because he came up for a couple opportunities last year. Did not look bad. This year, I projected him as one of the opening day bullpen members, had a rough spring training, has had an okay time in the minors, had it rough when he came up to the majors earlier this year. So it could just be that the Phillies bullpen this year is completely cursed, and anybody who comes up from the minors, it just has a rough time because that unit feels like they have so much pressure based on the way they started the year slow. But Michael Mercado, that's a guy the Phillies would be willing to move off of. That's a guy that I don't think the fan base would be sad to see go. And maybe less pressure with Baltimore opens up an opportunity for him. But I'd be careful looking at him as a guy that's going to contribute heavily at the major league level. He can make it there, but he hasn't really shown anything in Philly that says he's a mainstay in a bullpen at the major league level anytime soon.
Yeah, I think Orioles fans are going to be upset with me if this trade doesn't end with Mick Abel in Baltimore, but it does sound like he's just so sought after that I think the Phillies are going to be able to move him in what would be a bigger deal, right? I think if we were talking Felix Bautista right now, I think you'd be willing, it seems like, to throw in the name Mick Abel, but with a Kittredge and a Laureano, maybe not. And I think Laureano's value is high, but I also understand the flip side of it where it's like, this just might be a hot first half. Like, this is not the Ramon Laureano we've seen for the last 5 years. And I kind of understand that side of it as well. And same with, we're throwing in Kittredge, right? He's 35 coming off knee surgery. It's not like you're bringing him in to be the 8th inning, just shutdown man. You're getting help in your middle relief. So I've got 3 names. None of them are the top pitching prospects in the Phillies system, but I think Mercado is someone the Orioles could work with. I've been saying the Orioles should try and find their version or the second version of the Yennier Cano trade. When they got Cano, it was in 2022. He was up and down with the Twins bullpen. He had like a 20 ERA. He'd been good in AAA and then looked horrible in the big leagues. And the Orioles kind of got him as a throw-in. It took him 6 months, basically, 9 months to turn him into an all-star setup man because he had the stuff. He just needed the reset in the offseason, maybe a new team and less pressure and all that good stuff. And I think the Orioles should be searching for that guy. And I've identified Mercado as, maybe someone who's got that up and down. The Phillies clearly see something and like something, the fact that they've used him in the bullpen this year. So if a Mercado was paired with a Seth Johnson and maybe like a Wenhee Pan, I know he's a guy down in single A out of Taiwan who's got some good stuff and putting up some good numbers, but I mean, he hasn't even made it to double A. I don't think the Phillies are looking at him being a factor till 2027, probably at least for their team. Like, is that too much? That's 3 arms where you are giving up 2 guys who could theoretically pitch innings for the Phillies down the stretch. But I think if you told a Phillies fan right now, hey, we don't trade these guys, but neither Johnson nor Mercado are on the playoff roster, I don't think they would be very surprised by that. So is that a fair package to get a Laureano and a Kittredge back?
I don't think that's unfair. The only issue that I would have personally, if I was sitting in the president of the baseball operations chair, is the Wenhee Pan story is so awesome that I wanted to be a part of this organization, but you can't get sentimental like that when it comes to the trade deadline. I don't think that's an unfair type of return. And the thing with the Phillies is they just drafted 8 of their first 8 straight picks in the amateur draft were all pitchers. They're clearly trying to rebuild this bullpen through their minor league system with guys like Gage Wood out of Arkansas, who could be a quick to the majors type of guy. They don't have, if you're not in the bullpen plans right now, you're probably not in the bullpen plans like next year or two. So that takes guys like Michael Mercado and Seth Johnson to say, hey, if you're close, but we don't really trust you right now, we're going to have to rebuild this thing a lot quicker. You could be on the move. So I don't think that's unfair. And I think that works well for both sides. You guys get high upside, close to major league prospects, and the Phillies get back players that can help them now. So I wouldn't have any issue with that deal. Again, all of this pending that they could take a big swing with a back end of the bullpen guy from another team. And that would probably be where your guy Mick Abel goes. So I think we worked something out there a little bit.
I think I like this deal. Now, I think my last question would be, do you see the Phillies operating in a way where they wait until the big swing is made before they would make a deal like this? Maybe a little bit for optics, but more of like, if we give away something, say another team really likes Pine. He's got good stuff. He's going to be in Double A soon. Say a team really likes him. Do they worry that might need to be thrown in for a deal to get a Duran or something? Or do you think, if Elias and Dombrowski have this conversation tomorrow, the Phillies are willing to make the kind of quote unquote smaller side deal before they make the big splash?
It's really tough to say because Dave Dombrowski has said pretty cordially he's going to be aggressive. That's the thought process. That's what all of the insiders who are tight with the team or just in baseball in general have said. They're going to take a big swing. So I don't know if that says, hey, we already know who we have on the table to take this big swing, and those are going to be big name players and whatever throw-in you need after that. Like if you're willing to trade Mick Abel, you're going to throw in the 20th ranked prospect in your system if they want that as well. Like you'll make that deal work. It will not fall apart over that player. So that could open up for this to happen first. I just got to believe that with the necessity of the big time arm and the potential for that deal to get a little bit tricky with a lot of suitors, that would get done first. This would get done second. But if they're truly going to take a home run swing, there's nothing that says they can't do this move first just to get it out of the way. So I know that's kind of sitting on the fence there, just kind of the thought process of how the Phillies should go about this trade deadline.
I think we made a deal. I think Elias and Dombrowski, I know they're both listening, obviously. I know Elias always listens to Locked on Orioles. I know Dombrowski or at least Sam Fold is always listening to what's going on in Locked on Phillies. So I'm sure they're locked in. So Michael Mercado, Seth Johnson, and Wenhee Pan to the Orioles for Andrew Kittredge and Ramon Laureano, basically the two cheap veterans the Orioles signed to one-year deals in the offseason and potentially turn them into some pitching prospects. I think that kind of works out. And for Johnson and Mercado, like, they could pitch down the stretch for the Orioles. They could be targeted to be part of the 2026 team. You still get help for right now. It's not totally, all 19-year-olds who you're looking years and years down in the future. So this seems to work out. Well, Connor, we've got the crossover going. So I'll say Locked on Orioles, we'll be back Monday. We'll be recapping Orioles-Rays series, and then continue to talk trade deadline. If any Orioles fans listening or watching want to learn some more about the Phillies, I know my rooting interest goes to Philly pretty quickly when the Orioles are out of things, or really when a Baltimore team is out of things.
It's funny. That happens for a lot of people here in Philly, too, that they go to the Orioles. I guess it's proximity. And there's not really that rivalry. It's a sister city, brother
city kind of thing. Yeah. I think there's just so many people that have moved to one city or the other that everybody who's a Baltimore fan knows a Philly fan, and every Philly fan knows a Baltimore fan. So if Orioles fans want to jump on the Philly bandwagon, what can they expect coming up with Locked on Phillies?
Yeah, we're going to do a lot of stuff with the upcoming trade deadline. We actually do have a series with you guys coming up in early August. So right after the trade deadline, maybe we'll do a joint little trade deadline review and a preview of that series. But it's also a look at how this team goes from good to great, because they're 14 games over 500. But at the same time, the expectations are World Series. So a lot of fun stuff happening as the second half gets going over here.
Orioles and Phillies made 2 deals around last year's deadline. There seems to be a solid chance they will make another one. Connor Newcomb from Locked on Orioles, Connor Thomas from Locked on Phillies. Thank you all so much for joining us on this crossover episode. We hope you have a great weekend. Baseball is back. All-Star break is over. There are games on tonight, so enjoy the baseball this weekend, and you'll see both of us back on our shows on Monday.